you start to get serious about the bass. You start to really study your craft. You become proficient at what you do. You move to Toronto. You're playing in bands. At what point do the Watchmen come to play? So they had already, they formed in 1988. They had released an album in 1992. They were creating a buzz. And
Yep.
then there was an opening for a bass player. Can you kind of walk us through how you first became aware of the Watchmen and how the opportunity presented itself for you to join the band or at least audition for the band?
So when I moved to Toronto, a few things happened pretty quickly. One of the biggest being that I got a job as the receptionist for a music magazine. Magazine at the time was called Music Express. And it also became a bunch of other magazines after, but Music Express was a massive worldwide distributed magazine for years. And I got a job there as the receptionist. And after a little while, the photo editor, Rayanne Hollaboff, moved to go work with Jen Arden's management team. So I filled in for a couple of weeks while we were looking for a photo editor. And after a couple of weeks, the publisher came to me and said, "Seems like you're doing the job all right. Do you want to be the photo editor?" And I'd loved photography. I'd done a little bit of it in high school, and I was still fresh out of high school. Well, within a couple of years anyway. So I was excited as hell to be working at a magazine. Now I was a photo editor. So all of a sudden I had my own office and a Rolodex with, people like Annie Leibovitz in it, world-class photographers, Anton Corbin, Herb Ritz. And I was hiring these people to shoot bands like REM, U2, Ozzy Osbourne, so I had this crazy job immersed in massive worldwide artists. I was dealing with the top of the top. I was dealing with great publicists. I was dealing with, all these fantastic people, going to all the shows in Toronto, going backstage, meeting the artists. And I did this for a couple of years. And one of the partners in the magazine was a guy named Alan Gregg. And Alan Gregg was also partners with a guy named Jake Gold, and Jake Gold managed the Tragically Hip and the Watchmen. And we were combining office spaces. So Jake's office and the magazine's offices moved over onto King and Dufferin Street, on Dufferin Street. And I got to know Jake a little bit just from meeting in the coffee room. We never had offices right next to each other, but I'd see him in the coffee room every day. And my band at the time was a band called Growl. And Growl were going to Russia. We had a Russian tour, and we went for 5 weeks, and it was fantastic. They gave me the time off work. Everything was cool. And when I came back, it was, so the year before, but when I first met the Watchmen, actually, the year before, at our Christmas party for Music Express, we had it at the Horseshoe. And we had a bunch of bands playing. One of them was this new band from Winnipeg called the Watchmen. And I remember being there setting up, and I was getting all the food and stuff set up, and the Watchmen rolled in, and they were in their white GMC van that they still have, still sitting in a field somewhere out in Neil Cameron's land in Winnipeg. But they rolled in, and they hit that food table like they hadn't seen food in years. And I remember stepping back and going, "Who the fuck are these guys?" And they played, an hour later. I was busy, sort of, there was a lot going on. I remember kind of hearing them in the background and thinking, this is interesting. So now we're back to where we were. I go on this tour to Russia, and I get back, and I'm playing breakfast television with Growl, because we had just toured Russia, and that was newsworthy. So that morning I get into work, and I'm making myself a coffee after playing on breakfast TV and being up since 2 a.m. And Jake is there, and Jake says, "I thought you were a photographer." And I said, "No." I said, "Actually, I don't really take photos." I said, "But I work with photographers all the time." I said, "I'm a bass player." And he said, "Do you know the Watchmen?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I saw him last year at the Christmas party." And he said, "Well," he said, "they're looking for a bass player, and they've been looking for a long time." And he said, "I think you'd be perfect. I saw you today with your band." And I said, "I'm not moving to Winnipeg." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Well, think about it." And at lunchtime, he called me into his office and said, listen, we're going to buy you a plane ticket, fly out to Winnipeg, all expenses covered. I want you to go out and meet the guys. And I said, sure. And, I think that weekend I flew to Winnipeg, met the guys. Our first night together, like that's the song "The South," which is on "In the Trees." That was a song that I was kind of working on my own, that I was going to bring into Growl, and we started playing through some of the riffs that night. And by the first night that I met him, we wrote that song, and I realized this is something cool. What a great bunch of musicians. And by the time I left at the end of the weekend, they had offered me the gig, and I came home and spoke to my people at the magazine and said, this has been fantastic and thank you so much. But I've got a connection here and there's a chance and I've got to take it. It's what I've been working for. So I joined the Watchmen and proceeded to go out to Winnipeg and be broke for a long time until we got In the Trees written and recorded, and then that came out, and then the roller coaster began.